Global Business Insights podcast from PS Learning, featuring your hosts Dr. Charlotte de Brabant and Max Kent, bringing you the leading global experts and thought leaders from all industry sectors to give you cutting-edge key insights into the future of business, technology and thought leadership.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining in today's podcast. And I'm so excited to be talking about the future of spend management technology, of course, with my partner in crime, Max Kent, but a very special guest and a thought leader, Lucy Day. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe we can just kick off by having you just introduce yourself quickly and some of your background.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Great to be chatting to Charlotte and Max this afternoon, two people who I have had a great time working with previously. So thank you both for inviting me to join the podcast today. So I'm Lucy Day. I'm Senior Solutions Specialist at Proactis. And that really means that I get to be in the driving seat in showcasing our source to pay solutions. And although I've been at Proactis for 7 months, so not quite part of the furniture yet, I actually started working with Proactis, and I'm going to be showing my age here. I think it was circa 2005. I started working with them through their partner network. And it kind of feels like I've gone full circle and that I've come home, because it was through working with Proactis and actually working with a number of the accounts that I managed at one of their Sun Systems partners that I fell in love with everything to do with procurement. And over the course of the next 15, 16 years, I continued to work with them through the current partner that I started working with and a different partner, really working with organisations that were looking to streamline their back office procurement processes. So that wasn't just necessarily purchase to pay. That was also looking about how they managed their suppliers and how they onboarded them into their organisation, how they managed contracts, and actually how they actually went out and procured certain goods or services before rolling that into the P2P process. But there were other solutions that I worked with. Really, my background is more about making sure that back office processes are optimized and where they can be digitized using technology to bring that to life. And I've worked across lots of different sectors, financial services, not-for-profit and charity, energy, oil and gas and retail. But really and truly, I like solving problems. And it's great to be back at Proactis, as I've said, where my love of procurement first started all those years ago.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. Really pleased to have you on the podcast. As you know, absolutely loved working with you and our time together. So it's a real delight to have you back on here, and also just to talk about how things have progressed for you since we last worked together. So with that in mind, what are you seeing as some of the current challenges faced by businesses managing their spending at the moment, do you think?
There's a few. And I guess really sort of we can talk through some of those. I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'm sure this wasn't just the case for spend management per se. I think it was felt by every organisation out there across some aspect of their business. Is COVID has massively changed the landscape of the way that people work. People are working hybrid. Some people have gone fully remote. And I think that came as quite a big shock, even to some organisations that would consider themselves to be reasonably digitised. From a spend management perspective, what we saw, was a huge shift, particularly around the accounts payable function. In managing invoices and making sure suppliers were still paid on time. If you've not got people in an office and people are sending in their invoices to an office that's shut, how do you manage that? So there's been a huge shift towards making the whole spend management process digital as far as possible. And I think some organisations have struggled with that because not everybody is optimised and had a piece of technology that would allow them to quickly, move to remote working and continue the business as usual. So that's one thing that we've seen, and certainly has driven people towards looking at spend management more fully, and to support that way of working. I think the other challenge that we've seen is, how do you take a spend management solution and actually implement it in such a way that it creates a user-friendly and familiar environment for people to use to procure things, whilst actually doing all of the governance in the background. And I've seen this, time and time again, where people come to us and say, well, we need an AP automation solution. We're not really processing our invoices particularly effectively. And actually, when you drill into the problems that they then want to explore with you, the actual issues are, well, invoices aren't matching because the pricing's wrong, or the invoice is coming in where the purchase order has to be raised retrospectively, or, worst case scenario, the invoice comes in where we don't actually have the supplier on our systems yet. And when you kind of dial down into that actually is not an invoice processing issue. Yes, it's ultimately going to cause issues in processing those invoices where you can't match to the purchase order, but actually all of those issues are tied into the upstream P2P process. So I think, from a implementations perspective, what we see is people thinking far too much about the robustness of the workflow, the budget checking, and actually miss the point of how easy are we going to make it for our users to find what they need from the suppliers that are complicit with the pre-negotiated pricing that procurement have worked really hard to negotiate for the organisation. And what happens? People bypass the system. So all that time and effort that's been put in to actually go out, find a suitable technology, go through the process of, drafting the requirements and then implementing it, goes to complete and utter waste because they've missed the most important thing, which is making sure that the users can use it. And actually, it's going to make their lives easier, and you're going to get that full user adoption. So that's certainly one of the biggest challenges that we've seen over recent months.
Lucy, thank you so much for sharing. And yes, I can definitely resonate with that a lot. Maybe you can just elaborate how you see spend management technology then evolving now in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's already evolved so much already. We know technology certainly works at a big pace, and over the next 5 to 10 years, I see a greater use of AI coming into spend management. So where I see that from a user adoption perspective, and tying that back into the challenge that we just sort of spoke about before, is actually having the spend management solution drive the user towards the right supplier, the right pricing, making suggestions of where to procure things, and actually showing them, you're looking for this particular good or service. Let's actually search the wider market for you and show you where you can procure this at the most effective cost. And I think one thing that we're definitely starting to see already is actually using data that already exists in the market to do a lot of the upfront cost analysis before you even actually would necessarily go out and conduct a tender process. We see a lot of organisations that are now putting it as part of their requirements that the spend management solution must have the ability to integrate intrinsically with third-party data sources. And that's not just necessarily for a cost management perspective. It's also to bring in other key aspects of data around how to really go to do full belt and braces due diligence on the eligibility of a supplier. So that's looking at things like social value. It's looking at things like sustainability, because whilst cost has a bearing, that's very much what I perceive to be quite an old-fashioned notion that that's all procurement are there to do. Procurement are instrumental in driving some very key deliverables that we have, coming up over the next few years. In the UK in particular, we have very ambitious carbon targets, and the only way that organisations are actually going to be able to commit to any pledge that they've put out there in the domain is making sure that they're leveraging the data that they've got from a spend perspective and actually bringing that together with data that exists in the market to really actually be able to prove that they are having an impact on things like their carbon footprint in their supply chain.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, I can really agree with you there on seeing how things have evolved, and certainly that data source is critical for really any kind of procurement, as we know. So it's great to hear you speaking about that and how that whole ethos is continuing. You mentioned AI earlier, and on our podcast, we've had quite a few different thought leaders talk about their take on how AI will affect their own industry in the future. You mentioned it briefly, but have you got any more sort of insight into how you think AI and machine learning, those sort of more advanced automation technologies, will help spend management technology in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose really from my perspective, having worked across lots of different technologies, and some of those being in the sort of business intelligence and performance management space, I take artificial intelligence at the moment with a slight pinch of salt. It does have its place, but it's still a relatively new technology, and I think it still needs to be put through its paces, really, to kind of build the robustness into it. And the reason I say that is that for me, artificial intelligence should never actually replace actual intelligence. And having actual data in front of you to support making bigger decisions is, as we've just said, absolutely critical. You need to have things from a data perspective to support making some of those really critical decisions. So I would always want to be using any AI technology alongside the actual data that I have to validate anything that the AI technology may be suggesting. Where we do see it having an impact already, and certainly something that I do think is going to have a significant impact from a procurement perspective is, as I've mentioned before, having technology within the spend management platform that drives the user towards the supplier and the price, where it says you're looking for this particular good or service, and actually this is where you can get it at the cheapest cost. However, do be aware that this supplier has a higher carbon impact than a supplier that may be charging you a few pounds more, because those are going to be the sorts of things that people are going to be basing their decisions on from a P2P perspective going forward. So I see it having a presence now in the actual kind of P2P process, And I hope that that would be something that would continue. And as I say, bringing in those other data metrics alongside price to kind of help people make a well-rounded and informed decision before they go and buy something. But also, you know, down at the sort of downstream, the accounts payable processing side of things, we as an organisation at Proactis, I'm sure it's not lost on anyone that's listening to this, that's come from or is in a procurement space at the moment. There is a great reason to raise a purchase order when it comes to coding your invoice, because the solution is that is architected to make sure that that coding, particularly at line level, happens as part of that PO process, so that when the invoice comes in, the coding is driven from the PO and matched accordingly at line level. There are always going to be instances, however, where invoices will be non-PO. We see that a lot with people who are looking at, you know, things like phone bills, things like utilities and things like that. And they don't want the manual effort that it takes to then have to code those invoices manually. So again, what we're seeing with the AI technology is the ability to do auto-suggestive coding. So that would be where the technology would say, based on the invoice that you received from this supplier last month, which is of the same content or similar content, these are potentially the codes which you might want to allocate for this particular invoice. Is this, you know, correct? And then obviously, if that proves to be the case, the solution would then code that for the user. So it's auto-suggesting certain things from an invoice processing perspective. But as I've said, those are the two kind of biggest areas at the moment that we're seeing AI starting to get quite a significant footprint in.
Interesting, Lucy. And then how do you see that, and with the technologies and what you were just describing, how do you see that improve efficiency and reduction of costs then for businesses?
Again, I'm going to tie this back to COVID. I think a lot of us that worked through COVID, I certainly did. I was with Sage at the time and very well taken care of. I just absolutely could not be more thankful for technology. It allowed me to carry on and do my business as usual. It allowed me to connect with my peers, still look after my customers. And from a spend management perspective, I'm actually still quite surprised, even post-COVID, the amount of organisations that don't have certain aspects of a source to pay solution. And one of the biggest things we're seeing at the moment is contract management. People are still managing their contracts on spreadsheets. We had a real life example of a prospect that we were talking to that were looking at a contract management solution. And what thrust the business case forward for them was the fact that a contract of a 90,000 value auto renewed without anybody knowing about it. And that's a big number. So for me, I think any manual process that can be digitized from a spend management process is going to help save time. But more importantly, and sort of taking this back to COVID, it's actually about empowering and enabling your users. I think coming out of COVID, we all came to realize that we spend so much time at work and we spend so much time in our jobs that actually we need the technology to work more effectively and empower ourselves to do the value add stuff that we were actually brought into the organisation to do. And I know from having spoken to a lot of procurement professionals over the last few months that in a lot of cases, they do feel frustrated where they don't have the technology to support the absolutely business critical function that they provide. Because it's not just about making those cost savings. It's about making sure that suppliers are compliant. It's about reducing risk to the organisation. It's about making sure that the relationships with suppliers are working effectively, because suppliers are critical, just as customers are critical. So from my point of view, it's not just about process digitization and optimization, which is about saving time, bringing transparency. It's about making your users feel happier and actually letting them get on and do their job without the burden of time consuming and manual processes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. That's fantastic. And totally with you on that one. We worked together at sort of the back end of the pandemic. So certainly had that experience with you, really working with customers. And at the time, we really saw that shift in people moving towards more remote solutions. So certainly I'm with you on the fact that spend management technology kind of came of age really in the pandemic, didn't it? Where you sort of, people were on the fence, and then, as you say, the invoices weren't getting paid, so they needed to look at those technologies more seriously. We're also seeing, which you touched on, which I think is a really interesting theme that's come out in several of the podcasts, and certainly in the last one we did with Amanda Prochaska, she's touched on this as well, where procurement is starting to become more and more aligned, not just with the suppliers, but with the way that sales works. So having things like sales training or internal meetings between the sales and the procurement teams, because they're actually the two sides of the same coin. So understanding how sales works and how to sell to procurement seems to be a real key thing that's happening in the market, where as you say, the supplier relationships are really, really key. So they're being treated differently, and more input's being into understanding those. So with that in mind, what are some of the ethical considerations you've also seen when you're working with procurement people? Stuff around, the spend management technology is going to be accessing some pretty sensitive data. There's a lot of people logging into that, those systems. So what's your take on that in terms of, as people get more and more remote with this, what's the attitudes you're seeing around privacy, security, and empowering those people that you've talked about and letting them get on with their jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a consideration that is becoming more and more prevalent because of the way that people are working. And absolutely, data privacy and security is critical, and that's not just from a spend management perspective. We've seen the whole data security landscape change through the arrival of GDPR, of which that there's a whole host of regulations that need to be adhered to. But I think that there's absolutely a requirement to deliver data privacy and security, and actually prove that you are doing that. But I also think that sometimes people can get a little bit too bogged down in it, and I think there needs to be that balance and that confidence and robustness in the technology that it's going to comply with those things. And what I mean by that is, I've worked with lots of organizations in the past where it's kind of been an all or nothing. We've gone into the system, had a look at the way they're architected, and there's just no security set up at all. It's a free for all, which obviously is not appropriate. Then we've worked with other organisations that wanted to go completely the other way, and put in so much security it would actually prevent anyone from actually being able to do anything. And actually, that's not the purpose of the security and data privacy that exists. Certainly within our solution, the security is such that you can be restrictive and make sure that people are only seeing the suppliers that are relevant to them, the contracts that are relevant to them, or not at all. You can really dial things down to just give somebody, a basic access to a limited selection of suppliers. But the point is that you've got to invest the time in actually building that out as part of your system design. And what I would say is, there's a huge risk for any organisation that falls foul of that and doesn't properly scope that as part of their requirements when they're looking at spend management technology. It should be part of the system design, and it should be constantly revisited. It's such an important part of the solution. Key things like offboarding staff members that have left. The amount of organisations that, don't necessarily have a robust process for doing that, opens up the risk of all sorts of issues if that user still has access to the system, if after they've left. So I think it's hugely important. But I think there needs to be a balance. You want to make sure that there is that data privacy and security in there to make sure that people can only access the things that the business has deemed appropriate for them, but don't go too far the other way, because actually you'll end up making the system so restrictive, people won't use it.
Lucy, I completely agree. And that brings me actually to the next question, more on user experience. Maybe you can speak a little bit more of the importance of user experience in the adoption and success of new technologies.
This is a great question, and I'm so glad that you included this, because user experience is everything. And we are seeing that day in, day out, where if you don't have a system that's user friendly and enables users to find what they need quickly and easily, they'll bypass it. Or if you don't have a system that you've built in such a way that it guides users towards what you want them to do, you can't necessarily expect them to always know that they've selected the appropriate sourcing activity, for example. So user experience is really important. And what we see from organisations that approach us to talk about source to pay from a sort of full perspective, or certain elements of that, such as P2P, they're often looking at replacing the system because they're seeing those issues. Users are picking up the phone, going to the supplier directly, which is a huge red flag. So from our perspective, it's all about the end user from a design. You need to have the processes in place in the background to make sure that things follow proper process, that they're allocated to the right people at the right time, and that they follow the right approval, that they have the correct checks. But ultimately, the end user who just wants to go and buy something, or just wants to go and create a sourcing event, to then go and issue that out, they shouldn't necessarily have to be experts. And I think if you architect a system where you assume that all of your end users are going to be procurement experts, that's where you're going to fall foul, and you're going to start to see users not using the system and bypassing it. From my perspective, the greatest experience any end user can have, particularly from a P2P perspective, is if they're going in, they're looking at a catalogue, or going out to the supplier's website via a punch out, and you're guiding them. You're using the system to make their life easier. I mean, we've all bought things online, right? I'm on Amazon almost every day, and I saw the Amazon driver during COVID more than I saw anyone else. So if you're creating that ease of use and that familiar experience within the spend management solution, you're going to see the greatest level of uptake from a user perspective. So I cannot overestimate the importance of user experience. It's absolutely key if you want to get a spend management solution fully embedded and widely used within an organization.
Yeah, again, totally agree with you. User experience is so important for everything we're doing. So I'm glad that you're still practicing what you preach there, because it's hugely important topic. Um, Going back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, I really like what you were talking about potentially pushing more information to the end user to empower the decision they make at purchase order requisition stage. Um, is that one of the ways that you see spend management technology being used to promote sustainability and ESG and eco-friendliness in general in business operations, or are there sort of more than that that you're seeing?
Well, as you will know, Max, this is a very topic that's very dear to my heart. And that's primarily because in a past life, as you know, I got to see firsthand how much impact suppliers can have on the environment. And as a mum of 2 young children, I am very concerned about the planet that they are growing up in, and ultimately the planet that I will leave them behind. It is left in a good state, and it's on all of us to be responsible for making sure we reduce our carbon impact. And interestingly, it's those organizations with a very high level of indirect spend that actually the biggest impact from a carbon footprint perspective is going to be in their supply chain. So spend management and particularly procurement's role in that, and actually supporting the organization's overall goal to either become carbon neutral, or in best case scenario carbon negative, is huge. It's absolutely huge. So I absolutely see spend management technology being used to promote it, because if you're looking at scope 3, which is everything that sits within third party from a carbon perspective, it is all that spend data. And what's so frustrating is that anyone that's got a spend management solution has that data already. They've just got to bridge it together with the appropriate carbon intensity ratios to be able to get that visibility and start making that impact. And even doing little things. I mean, I do this personally, and I would encourage everyone to do the same. More and more suppliers now are giving you the option to consolidate your deliveries. You might go on to Next or Amazon, that's a marketplace where you're buying things from different suppliers, which means ultimately all of those things that you're ordering could arrive at different times. But how about you actually just consolidate that delivery to one? Now, if we all did that, and if you think about if businesses did that, that would have a huge impact on the carbon footprint. But I think, spend management technology and actually consolidating that spend information with the carbon data that is out there already and will only continue to evolve is absolutely paramount, because, as I've said, it's on all of us, businesses included, to really take ownership of how they are dealing with sustainability and start making those decisions from a procurement perspective that include that very important information that is absolutely vital to us getting towards a far better and healthier planet than we have today.
What a great answer. And Lucy, just to close off, maybe you can just share to our listeners today your tips. How can businesses effectively implement and integrate all the spend management technologies and just the future of what is to come into their operation?
Well, I wish I had a quick and simple answer to that question. I mean, spend management is such a broad term, isn't it? For me, it encompasses really what I consider to be full digital, procurement. It includes everything from, sourcing to onboarding suppliers through a complicit process and making sure that, you know, they comply with the requirements of the organisation, through to effective contract management. And I don't just mean contracts in a repository. You know, actually, how is that contract performing against key metrics that you have determined you want to measure that contract by? And actually, then what happens to that supplier if that metric falls below an acceptable threshold? And same with SRM. You know, what are the metrics that you're holding your suppliers accountable to? And thinking about what we've just been talking about, sustainability, social value, where that metric falls below an acceptable threshold, what are you as an organisation going to do about it? And then you've got P2P sitting underneath. You know, purchase to pay absolutely is vital. You want to make sure that people are procuring through a compliant process with the due diligence around budget checking, and having all the transactional aspects taken care of. But actually, it's that upfront kind of digital procurement piece and all of that due diligence that's done up front that is so, so important. Because if you don't get that right, the P2P process by you know, consequence will fall apart effectively, because, you know, you've got no control. So for me, I think one of the key things I would say is don't jump in with both feet on day one when you come to look at spend management. What we encourage anyone talking to Proactis to do, and you know, we've got lots of people within our organisation that have done the job, that are SIP certified. So, you know, we like to think, having been in the market for over 20 years, we're you know, experienced in what we're saying, is have a look at where your biggest pains are. Start to think about where the biggest impact can be, and then look at things from a milestone perspective. You know, we pride ourselves on having a full suite, but it's modular. So that means that we can work with a customer from day one to implement contract management or purchase to pay, and then we can grow with them, and we can actually get them to a point at which they're fully optimized, but at a pace that's suitable to them. Because I think what we have to appreciate, and particularly what we're seeing out there in the market because of the cost of living crisis, one of the unfortunate casualties of a tough market is people in procurement. And actually, they're so important to the organisation. So, you know, when it comes to looking at this, make sure that you do your homework in terms of understanding your processes, and be honest with yourself. You know, just because something's been done, you know, for however long, and that's the way it's always been done, it doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to review it, look at, you know, where it could be optimized, and seeing what impact could have. And then ask yourself the really, really, really important question is, what is the impact on your organization by doing nothing? And that for us is one of the biggest things that we see. You know, we spend a lot of time with organizations that put so much time and effort into a business case that then go to market and then don't do anything at all. And that for me poses the biggest risk of all, because the world is changing, the world is moving forward, and no one can afford to stand still.
That's a really brilliant answer, Lucy. Thanks again so much for taking the time to explain and go through all of your knowledge and experience with us. I mean, one of the things I really love is that it feels like you've never repeated a year in your career. You've learned all the way through from every single business you've worked from, and now with summarising all of that into some real key learnings for all of our listeners to really get into. A lot of the things you said there are some massively key things for businesses to be very mindful of when they're looking at anything to do with this technology. So I think that's some real learnings for anyone listening to this from a real expert in the industry. So thanks again from both of us for all of your insights and time there. Just quickly, if anyone wants to explore Proactis more, if they want to understand more about how they could potentially look at that technology, what's the best way to get in touch?
Best way to get in touch is go to our website, which is www.proactis.com. There are links to request some demonstrations. I'm always open to having a conversation with anyone. You can find me on LinkedIn under Lucy Day and drop me a message. But do come and have a chat to us. We're a friendly bunch. We're very honest. We're very transparent. We don't. We talk best practice. That's what we're all about. So do reach out to us if you've got any questions and you want to have an exploration of some of the things that we can potentially help you with from a source to pay perspective.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and especially also to our listeners. Thank you once again for joining in and tuning in. And it was such a great pleasure to have you with us today, Lucy. And that being said, I'm looking forward to Max to our next podcast soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Speak soon.
everyone.
Cheers.
Featuring your hosts, Dr. Charlotte de Brabant and Max Kent.